apologize to one gentleman sitting right at the back, Joe. He's looking around, what has he done? I express my thanks to those people who've done special favors for me, and there are quite a number, and I left him out. He did a very special favor for me, for which he'll remain in my prayers for a long time. So I just want to make up for that. I clean left him out. But there are others too. The cooperation in the class is first class, to say the least. It's excellent, the way people have banded together to produce good stuff. For those, I see a couple of new faces here tonight, maybe more than a couple. Our courses are being followed in England, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. All over these countries, the latter countries at least. I can't tell you exactly whom. I've got a list of some in, or I've got on the computer, of course. I've got names who are receiving it as we go along. But then some people have sent especially to Alton Library to get copies of the discs of the metaphysics, for instance. And I don't know, but I imagine that that will happen with the psychology too. Philosophical psychology will be produced on discs and followed in many countries. There are people who are looking at us with some envy because of the type of courses and because the fact that they exist in so few places in the United States or in the world today. Can you guarantee them? There are universities, so-called, throughout North America, and frankly, some of them are not worth the pavement they sit on. That's what my judgment is. If you wanted some verification of that, read Newman's copy, The Idea of a University, and you'll see what I mean. Many of them are not universities. They're often called multiversities, and they're really just training places for some kind of occupation. They're not strictly universities in the proper meaning of the word. So we dealt with the proofs last class, just a couple of them, we dealt with them. The proofs that there is a final cause for man, an end for which he exists. Now, not all of this is clear to everybody because you haven't studied metaphysics. Nevertheless, I proved two ways, from movement and from contingency. That is to say, some things don't exist necessarily. They can or they cannot exist. A tree, for instance. That's why you chop it down. You want it to not exist. So it's very easy to prove that some things are contingent beings. Well, what we want to know is there a necessary being that will satisfy man's every desire for that phenomenon we called happiness? And you remember we defined that as the fulfillment of every desire and the elimination of all evil. That was, 1600, 1700 years old, that definition. It was put forward by Augustine of Hippo. So we prove the existence of a being which is unlimitedly in its perfections, has its perfections, or is its perfections, is a better way of putting it, the proper way, and that goes right down to the very core of that being. We prove its existence. There are 5 ways of proving its existence. And of course, some smart aleck philosophers love to say, oh, those proofs are no good anymore. But the kind of philosophers I'm talking about are often Catholic clergy. Those proofs don't apply anymore. So my immediate question is, which one? Oh, all of them. I see. What are they? Oh, well, you know, I learned them in the seminary, but I can't tell you what they are now. They're wishing I hadn't asked them the question. Well, you shouldn't be denying the validity of those proofs now, because those proofs have stood the time of all the great philosophers and investigations, whether it's Billouard, Bagnès, or Cajetan, or any of them, Jean Poinsot, these great philosophers down through history. It's withstood the assault of philosophers. And nobody has yet proven any of those, nor can they prove them false. What do? We went from the more perfect to the less, from the less perfect to the more perfect. The way it operates, that ultimate being, call it what you like, don't be like the biologist that says, I don't accept the existence of a soul. Well, I said, don't use the word biology then, or don't use the word psychology, or don't use the word animal, because anima is the Latin word for soul. And psychology, psyche in Greek, is the Greek word for soul. But they insist on using those words. In any case, a biologist doesn't like to use the word soul. He said there's a biogenic principle. What the hell is a biogenic principle? It's just another way of saying the same thing. Call it what you like. I don't care what you call it. But what animates all living things, plants, animals, and man, is called traditionally, all through the history of the world, called a soul in the English, the Anglo-Saxon word, coming from soul, S-A-W-O-L. But in Latin, anima. In Greek, psyche, which we translate as psyche. So, call it what you like. I remember when I was 17. John Hyle in Australia said to me, I am a Freemason. We don't believe in the existence of God, of course. Oh, don't you? No, we only believe in a supreme power. What in the name of heaven is he talking about? He didn't know. He's just using other words for the same thing. So that's what you get. In any case, there's a tremendous assault upon the existence of a God in this century, probably greater than has any time been in the history of the world. The assault upon that. The ACLU stands for Un-American Civil Liberties Union, and such organizations, the secular humanists, who say secular humanism doesn't exist, and then proceed to tell you all about it. I've experienced that. I went into their den and experienced things like that. So these people love not calling a spade a spade. In any case, my friends, we saw that there is an argument from cause, or is it effect, back to cause. As it exists, as the creative act took place, cause causes the effect. But what we argue from is we look at the effects and argue back to the cause. You remember the first principle we ever really learned was do follows be. That's to say, whatever a thing does be, so it'll do. Dogs do like doggies do. Cats do like pussycats do. Etc. Elizabeth likes that. So everything operates according to its nature, in other words. When I was in the pharmacy school at the University of Sydney, we had to do an enormous amount of analyses, inorganic and organic, etc. And we studied the do's of things to see what they do be. Something like, for instance, turned out to be, say, silver nitrate. Silver nitrate. We have a look at this substance. I remember it was one of the things given out, and you were just given it in a little tube, just this white crystalline substance. And so you started to see what it could do. You saw that it could, in a solution with a soluble chloride, would form a white precipitate. Oh, so you knew it was silver, lead, or mercury. Then you poured in some ammonium hydroxide solution, and it redissolved. So you knew now it had to be silver. It was one of those three, and now the final act, what can it do? Only silver can do that. Forming silver diamine chloride and silver hydroxy chloride, which is soluble, each of which is soluble. So we look at what things do. So we survey the world around us, but we don't do it in the slipshod way that lots of people are doing it today, calling, ID? An argument from design. Intelligent design, thank you. Intelligent design. That's not what we do. It's nice and sounds very good. It's not good enough. We've got to get right down to the nitty-gritty. So in the fifth way, we study, for instance, sight is always ordered towards acts of seeing, not towards acts of nutrition. We don't listen with our eyes. Eyes do an act of seeing, and nothing else but an act of seeing. So, let's look at that fifth way, which we did not look at last class. Who stole my eraser? Like I stole it. So, what have we got? This is this argument from design, certainly in a special way. But it's design in particular. Not in a nice general way, you just look around the universe and say, the beautiful stars, yes, they are beautiful, and certainly they indicate that some designer did that. But it's non-apodictic, non-conclusive. You cannot arrive at a conclusion with that, unfortunately. But let's take an arrow going towards the target. There's an interesting thing that always puzzles me here. I have to think of the French word first, and then the Latin, then the English word, because I studied, of course, in a French university. And so it's amazing how words, when you first meet them, Aristotle remarked on that somewhere in one of his works, that we remember what we first saw. When people go to the theatre, he said, the first actor they meet, they like him, and they like him forever after that. And when somebody else comes on, might be the real hero, everybody hisses him. So, the target. Now, does the arrow send itself to the target? Not likely. It might accidentally be blown towards the target by a wind or something like that. But we assume, if you had an arrow land right near you, you'd assume that somebody has fired that arrow. I was in the Burragorang Valley years ago, and suddenly, whang, went a bullet. Holy mackerel, two of us just jumped. There was a slight mist that day. We were out hunting, and this bullet went clang right near us. Well, we didn't assume the bullet took a jump itself. We assumed somebody fired it. So it takes intellect to send an arrow towards a target. Why? Because the end has to be known. And something which doesn't yet exist. It doesn't yet exist as a target. It just exists as a thing. But this intellect sent it towards the target. The archer sent it towards the target. And he is a rational being. He's an intellectual being. And he can know the idea of this as a means to achieving this end. He can foresee that. Senses can't do that. It has to be an intellectual being. Senses can only contemplate this here and now always. But the intellect, we can imagine it, but that'll be under the power of the intellect. But an intellect goes from can think to does think. Potency to act. From can think to does think. An intellect can't send itself towards its act because that means it acted before it thinks. That's a contradiction. That means it acted before it acted. That's absurd. So it requires an intellect to send it to that. To send the intellect from can think to does think. Nothing can actualize itself. Nothing can make itself does think without something moving it towards that. Otherwise, it means it acted before it acted. Maybe that requires a multiplicity of intellects. Maybe one, maybe a billion. It doesn't matter whether we know that or not. All we must know is there must be a final act of intellection. A final act of intellection. A final act of the intellect acting. Not a final intellect, but a final act of the intellect. Aristotle, who lived 400 BC approximately, said, God is the understand of an understand. He didn't say an understander. He said he is the understand of an understand. He's a pure act of understanding, as Aristotle went on to explain. A pure act of understanding. In the 12th book of Metaphysics, 9th chapter, he said that. One man told me when he read that, heard it for the first time in a lecture, then went to the book, his tears went down his face. He thought it was so beautiful. It's interesting, by the way, how people can jump to conclusions. I was at a World Congress of Philosophers in Montreal some years ago, 1983 I think it was, and one man was raving about this, about somebody who has the good sight to make sure we had good translations and put them all together in a wonderful book, The Basic Writings of Aristotle. His name is Richard McKeon, and The Basic Writings of St. Thomas, etc. Did a wonderful job. He said, unfortunately, he's not here today. He said, but we should acclaim him when he arrives. Voice from behind him, but I am here. It caused quite a bit of amusement. I just presented a paper, as a matter of fact. It was during my session that this happened, and I could see the giggles on the faces if they didn't express them aloud on the various professors as they're sitting there. And Richard McKeon was quite taken aback. He said he's a wonderful man. I've always thought very highly of him, but he didn't know he was there. He didn't know him at all, but he was trying to make out that he did know him in an indirect way. So this is the fifth way. In other words, it's based upon finality, or things going to their end. The intellect, I use this just as an example. I could use probably 1,000 other examples, but the intellect going to its act of understanding, this intellect going from its can act to does act, can understand to does understand, and this one, all these others going from can understand to does understand. Their finality is to operate towards their end. What's the end of the intellect? Understand. So you must come to one which is understanding, but doesn't have any potency. He can understand, he is actual understanding. So Aristotle was right. Philosophers have shown what a magnificent thought that man had. No wonder Woodbury said if the man walked into the room, he'd go and kiss the floor where the man walked. Aristotle was truly great. Yet, in the Middle Ages, he was not looked upon as somebody worthy of giving too much attention to. It was more Plato. Now, I have a beautiful picture. One of my former students gave it to me. A married woman. She gave me this picture by Raphael. And, of course, it's obvious why she gave me that, I think. But the picture shows you the Aristotle and Plato walking into the Lyceum, I think it was, Plato's Lyceum. Oh no, Plato had the Academy. I always get those two mixed up. That's right, Aristotle had the Lyceum. But it was walking into the Lyceum, and Aristotle, who was Plato's student, were discussing something very deep. And as they're walking in, I think they're both holding books, and one's hand is like that, and the other's hand is like that. Aristotle's hand is like that. He was down to earth. Plato was like that. He was up in heaven. His thoughts were very heavenly. And the Christian world thought that he was safe to follow as a philosopher. But Albert the Great and St. Thomas Aquinas both argued for Aristotle. With Plato too. Plato wasn't left out, oh no. But with Aristotle, they saw that the greatness of Aristotle. And the Arabic world had the writings of Aristotle, which were lost in the Great Fire at Alexandria about the 1st century BC, and they lost all the works of the West did, but the Arabs somehow had got hold of them. So what they did is they translated them from Greek into Arabic. But St. Thomas Aquinas was a bit suspicious of that. So he got William of Moabit to translate them again. And the idea was he got them directly from the Greek into Latin. William was a very wonderful Greek scholar. You had a question?
I did. It's not quite clear to me. What is the actual difference between the first way and the fifth way? When I see that diagram on the board, it looks to me like another version of whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. So what's the real distinction?
All five are really the same proof, looked at from different facts and different principles. That's why they're not called five proofs, they're called five ways. I wanted to finish my story first, though. Anyway, they got the works of Aristotle, and what they did is they improved on that, which corrected all the errors of Averroes and Avicenna, the great Arabs who made rather colossal blunders in that. Coming back to the other, they're all five ways, but there is a difference. And I will come to that shortly, if you don't mind. But all expressions of causality. I was going to explain the essence of the arguments in just a second or two. But anyways, I lost my train of thought a little bit. We'll get it back in a second. So there were the ways of Aristotle were brought to the fore, and Plato was supposed to be very heavenly in all his remarks, because remember, he said that there were forms in another world. And why is this called man? This is called man. This is called man. This is called man. You're a man tonight, in case you didn't know. And why is man? Well, we all call man. This may be Bob, Susan, Mary, might be something that makes us all different, but yet we're all the same, because we're all made in imitation. Participation is the word he'd use, in heaven. We participate a pure form in heaven. So Plato was looked upon as something very, very wonderful. You'll remember I said when we were dealing with this that St. Augustine saw this following Plato and said all these forms in heaven were ideas in the mind of God. That's Platonic teaching, at least Augustinian teaching, which was following in the line of Plato. Now, there are 5 ways of proving the existence of God. And each way, the principles in each way, is a mode of causality. Each one is a mode of causality. For instance, whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. There's the first way. The 5th way, every being operates for the sake of an end. Now, that's a different way. That's based on final causality, not efficient causality. See the difference? Final causality. Final cause is caused by being desired. Efficient cause is caused by, let's say, giving a push, if you like. Efficient cause. It'd be efficient causes here. But every one of the proofs are based upon the principle, the proper principle for each one is based upon this, some mode of causality. The common principle, namely limited regress, you can't go back infinitely, that's a corollary of the other. That follows from causality. So there are 2 distinct principles, in a way, but one is a mode of the other. So there's a difference in efficient causality and in final causality. And that's what the 5th way is dealing with, final causality. What is the end? So what we wanted to know, we set out to find out something about this end we think we have. And we prove that he's an unmoved mover. That's the first way. He's an uncaused cause. That's the second way. He is a necessary be. He's a necessary being. I like the word be rather than being, because he bees necessarily. That's the third way. He's the most perfect being which is participated by all beings. He's the most perfect one. That's what we prove in the 4th way. Then in the 5th way, he's an unordered orderer. He orders, but he's unordered. The same as the first way, he's a cause, but he's not caused. He's not moved. I think I said that wrongly a minute ago. Movement is the first way. He's an unmoved mover. And Aristotle was very famous for that. But people said it wasn't the Christian God. Well, the Christian God is revealing about God things about himself which we couldn't discover. We cannot discover by reason. Some of them, much we can, but he's revealing this. There are 3 persons in one God. Well, hell's bells and blowflies pantaloons. Man couldn't possibly discover that. And it took philosophers a long time to reconcile the notion of personality with division in that. They are, as it were, 3 notions of God, 3 viewpoints of God, looking at him as if you're looking at one triangle but 3 sides, as it were. So it might appear that there are 5 gods on account of all of this. So that's the immediate conclusion of each one of those ways. But the immediate conclusion, through those 5 ways, we discover there is one ultimate conclusion. And it's this. This ultimate being cannot go from being caused to cause, cannot go from, say, being moved to move, etc. He's a pure act of movement, no potency. He's a pure act of causality, no potency. He's a pure act of being, no potency to be. He isn't a being that can be. He's a being that does be. Therefore cannot not be from eternity. Cannot not be. He must have been from eternity. Then he's the most perfect being, which is participated by all beings, and he's not participated. I'm sorry, he doesn't participate. He is the perfection that all things have participate in him. And he's an unordered orderer. He orders other things, but he's not ordered for himself. If that were not true, my friends, nothing could exist. Nothing would move. Nothing would exist in any way whatsoever. Either he necessarily exists or nothing else can be. The third way is the way that professional philosophers always love to uphold, the third way. Namely, we argue from contingent things to one necessary being. So, such a being must not consist of potency, for it would require to be moved to act. Therefore, such a being must be pure act. He doesn't go from can act to does act. He's a pure act. And what's the ultimate pure act? Be something. Must be. It's the one ultimate thing, because everything around us, all the things we can know or do know, have a distinction between what they are and whether they are. And we know that. Things can be rubbed out of existence. A tree can be chopped up and humans die, and it's always been worried, a lot of people, that we may not survive after death. You don't find that amongst primitive people. They assume we survive after death. It's only amongst so-called sophisticated man who says, oh, there's no life after death. Well, I'm sorry, my friends, we prove that. If anybody wants to challenge any of those proofs, what you've got to do first of all is attack the principle. You attack the fact and you attack the principles. It's useless to just attack, say, oh, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. That's a waste of time. You've got to look into the proofs and prove this or that. Show that the principles are true, or show how to defend them. We saw how to defend the one of movement last week. The thing either gives movement to itself, or it's got movement from another. But if it moved itself, that means it had the movement before it had the movement. That's a contradiction. Or, if it had it already and didn't give to itself, but had it, but it didn't move, so it didn't have the movement. Therefore, it must come from another, as we saw. So, this being, is a pure act of existence, a pure be. He is be. He doesn't have being, he is be. I seem to remember a statement somewhere, who are you, Lord? I am who am. Am is my name, that's the verb to be. Those who have studied any languages are very familiar with the verb to be. The fundamental verb in any language. The Romans even left it out. Homer caecus est, I've read. Homer is blind. The is isn't there, it's assumed. The Romans saw the necessity of the verb to be and just assumed that. Homer, caecus, blind, est. Homer is blind. And frequently you can read great lapidary Latin on stones, which is what lapis means, stone, and in various buildings and various memorials, there's no verb there, because the verb to be. So the people have named him according to their own mode. We call him God, the one to whom we make sacrifices, or we'll call him a deity. Now, deity comes from the Latin word dies, meaning day. It comes from that. So the day means he's like the day, bright and shiny, the brilliant one, the great one. Brilliant. Our minds are overwhelmed when we try to study him. So that's the derivation of the naming of him. One means the one to whom we make sacrifices, the other one is reflecting from the day. We name things, as Aristotle says, as we know them. So then, the nature of God is something I want to deal with now. What kind of a being is he? From these 5 ways, we can deduce a lot. And I'm going to show that in just a minute. We know him to have simplicity. Yeah, it couldn't be compound, because he'd have to be put together by some other being, so he wouldn't be God. He has perfection. Well, that follows from the 4th way. He has all the perfections. Goodness. That follows from the 4th way and the 5th way. He has goodness. He's not an arch-fiend. Infinity. That's a necessary property. He must be infinite. Because if every movement is traceable back to him, every being is traceable back to him, he must be infinite. He couldn't be less than infinite. Now, remember what I said about the beach last class? No matter how long the beach, I remember standing on 9 Mile Beach in Australia, and I was thinking to myself, how many grains of sand could man possibly live long enough to write down the noughts that would be necessary to describe the number of the grains of sand? But everyone is kept in existence at every instant by him. Every instant. Never ceasing. Ubiquity. Ubi in Latin means where. So ubiquity means he's everywhere. He's ubiquitas, as the Latins would say. He's everywhere. Because if everything depends upon him, he has to be everywhere. But don't misunderstand. God's not limited to space. In fact, it's wrong to say he exists in space. He's beyond that. Immutability, changeableness. No, he cannot change. Why not? Because if he changed, that means he goes from one state to another, one state of imperfection to another. That's absurd. Eternity, he cannot not exist. If he could, then nothing else would exist. Unicity, he's oneness. If you had to have many gods, as I argued with a young man on one occasion, you'd have to have some reason, some principle for the argument. We are many, man is one. This is Plato's great problem. Man is one being, one kind of being, but there are many of those beings. It's the problem of the one and the many. Why? Because we're composite. And it really took Aristotle to explain that. Plato didn't quite catch it. He didn't understand the notion of matter, primary matter. He only could understand the notion of the forms, but not the matter. So, unicity, if that is denied, there must be some reason, some principle whereby he's multiplied. If he's multiplied, then he's not God. Transcendence. The word transcend means climbs beyond. Scandere in Latin means to climb. Trans means across. We've got the Trans-Canada Highway. That means across Canada. So he is transcendent. He climbs beyond. He rises above all the things that exist. So then, what we find is this is the way by the way, I sent this all out to you, the notes I'm using tonight, because it goes beyond what we've set out in pages and what I had intended sending out for the course. I've sent it out to you rather late. Some got it and some didn't, I believe. So at least some lucky people happened to be on the computer at the time. So a being whose essence is other than be. That's what we argue from. That's all we've got all around us. Beings whose essence and be are other and other. A 3-headed dog, that's an essence. But does it be? I don't know. That's quite another thing. I've seen 2-headed fish in the fish research places in the province of Quebec. 2-headed fish. But 2-headed men, I don't know. Don't know whether they've ever existed or not. I can't tell you. So it's other than be. In other words, what it is, whether it is. There are 2 principles. We call one its essence or its nature, and the other its be, its isness, its existence. We don't like to use the word existence. You find in all the great works that nobody asks if God exists. Is there a God? Does he exist? You see, exist comes from 2 Latin words. I have plus, I had a suspicion we dealt with this last class, to stand outside of. Stand outside of their causes. Little baby exists, stands outside its mother and father. Stand outside their causes. God doesn't have any causes, so we can't say he exists. We could say whether God, as St. Thomas puts it this way, an Deus sit, whether God may be, whether he does be. Be is the great word. So we find from that, we look at composition around us, and we find simplicity. We argue from composition to simplicity of God. We argue from imperfection to his perfection, his goodness. We argue from limitation to infinity, his omnipresence. We argue from mutability, changeableness, to immutability, exist eternally. We argue from plurality to unicity. I've set this out on the computer for you and sent it out to you. Rather late. It was unfortunate, but it was beyond my control. So do follows be, my friends, and the mode of doing follows the mode of being. We had that on the board earlier. Things operate according to their nature. Things do according as they be. If something does be a dog, then it'll do like a dog. If something does be a squirrel, it'll do like a squirrel. If something does be a tree, it'll do like a tree. Psychiatrists look at people to see how they operate, to find out what their state of conscience is, etc. Everybody does that. Every science does that. They want to know, what's this alloy made up of? So they'll do an analysis and they'll watch what it can do to find out what it does be. I remember saying that before two biologists at the University of Ottawa, and they were startled. They'd never thought of it. Yet they're practicing, teaching, etc., and doing research in biology day after day. What comes out of a being reveals its nature. That's what it amounts to. We can only give out what we've got. Now, note, by the way, that St. Thomas, I just grabbed a little student's handbook just to point out a few things. When he's dealing with God, the first article is there such a thing as a science of theology? The first article, and it's in first question, and it's in 10 articles. Second question in 3 articles. He asks whether we can prove that there's a God and how do we go about it, etc. All the elements are there, but in a simplified manner. Now, then after that, the next questions, up to question 26, all they do is ask what kind of a being is this God? And they look at all the properties, the simplicity, and all that we said about simplicity, on goodness in general, etc. The goodness of God. Then he'll deal with evil, the infinity of God, the unity of God. This is how the philosophers investigate. And how he's known by us. 12 articles there. The names of God, etc., etc. They're thoroughly examined, proved, analysed, and conclusions drawn from them. So now, with regard to the simplicity of God, this demands a special treatment. I think we've got time to do that before we take a break. Or some of it anyway. How much the higher is some nature, so much the more intimate is that which emanates from it. By emanate, he means goes out from it. Whatever goes out from something. The higher the nature, the more intimate is what goes out from it. It's not difficult. Don't be worried now if you can't grasp it fully. Now, non-living things, first of all, have the lowest place. Because they can only act one upon another. Now, hot coffee can only act upon the spoon. It can't act on itself. It can only act to produce a hot spoon. From fire is generated hot things. It's one thing acting upon another. So that's not very intimate to inanimate things. Plants hold the next place. What happens to it, what it can do, comes from within the plant. And what emanates goes out little by little. But it goes outside the thing. So that ultimately everything's extrinsic, outside it. That is to say, from a plant proceeds other plants. First of all, there's the flower, then there's germination, then there's seeds, and the seeds are thrown off, and another plant is developed. So what goes out from it is not a very higher life. But there's a higher life still, and this is the one that brute animals have. Man also shares in this. But let's concentrate on the brutes. Although its emanation, or what goes out from a brute, although it begins from without, nevertheless is terminated in the interior. The dog sees the hare. So the image of the hare is in the imagination. It starts from outside, but it becomes interior. So that's a less emanation. What the dog does is more intimate in its emanation. Let's put it that way. So the principle and the term pertain to diverse things. In other words, what he's knowing is the animal. It comes from him, but what he's knowing out there is the animal. Now with the intellect, it's a different thing, because an intellect can reflect upon itself. Man can understand that he understands. Dogs can't do that. If they can, then they're rational. And if they're rational, where's their universities, their schools, their governments? Where are their public toilets? Where are their houses where they can operate in a generative fashion, which they don't do now, as you well know. But the intellect is reflected upon itself and can understand itself. I can understand that I understand that 2 and 2 equal 4. I have no difficulty with that. But a dog can't do that. I've watched dogs, funnily enough, in Montreal and somewhere else. I can't remember where the other place was. A couple of places I've observed this. I've observed in Sydney one time at a public concert where you're all seated on the grass and they're playing in a pavilion or something like that, and people will have their dogs with them. And I've seen somebody hit a drum very loudly, and the dog will go, whoo! That's about all. Just ignores the rest of the concert. And something that's very beautiful, some soprano singing or something like that, and the dog's looking around for other dogs, not paying attention to the soprano. Or you might say soprano. The intellect is reflected upon itself and can understand itself. But dogs don't have intellect, as we proved earlier. No brute animals have intellect. They have estimative sense, which is the highest, but it's still only a sense. But then there are intellectual life, diverse degrees are found. And I think we should stop there, because it's going to take us a little bit of work to get through this other on the intellect. Take a break. You're all invited for coffee.